Hello and welcome back to the World Leader Leaderboard, the podcast where we rank every politician and tell you who's winning and who's losing each week. This week I'm joined by Rory.
Hello.
Zach.
Hello.
And Nadja.
Hello.
How are we all doing?
Good. Yeah.
Welcome
Great.
back, Rory.
Thank you.
You're normally an absolute fixture of the podcast. It's been a couple of weeks off, so
but
nice to have you back.
I've been paying attention.
Okay,
I've been
good.
tuning
We're
in,
going to be
don't
testing.
worry. Okay.
I
We'll
want
see.
the appraisals in the comments from the audience. As always, we're going to run through our winners and losers of the week to let you know who's winning and losing. We're going to move them around on our leaderboard. Here's how the leaderboard currently stands. And by the end of the episode, we'll have shifted people around. We'll have added people. There's 2 new additions this episode, which is huge. And we will also be moving or adding someone based on your suggestions from the comments last week. Let's start though with our winners of the week and let's get straight into it. Rory, you've been away.
Okay.
Let's throw you straight back in.
Yeah, first one to go.
Who is your winner this week?
My winner this week is Anthony Albanese, the Australian Prime Minister. He's still fresh off the back of his massive election victory earlier this month. But the news sort of keeps getting better for him in that the opposition coalition in Australia, the Liberal National Coalition, has split up basically, which is a gift to his Labour Party. It means that there's no large opposition force in Parliament. There's just smaller parties. I think his Labour Party are on 94 seats, and then now the Liberals, as their own party, only have like 28. So he has a massive majority. The Liberal Nationals have sort of been in various forms of coalitions for about 100 years, I think, and they have split up before, but not since the 80s. So this is quite a big moment in Australian politics. I think the Nationals are sort of considered the more rural, agrarian kind of party, whereas the Liberals are a more standard centre-right party. But for Albanese, other than the fact that in Parliament means he's got a much bigger majority, it also means he has sort of more options for negotiating with other parties, particularly in the Senate, where he does have to bring other parties on board to pass legislation. Rather than having the Liberal Nationals together as one block, they're split into 2, so he has different routes to try and get approval for various things. So that's sort of just like a cherry on top for his election win, really. So I think he's going to be pretty happy with that.
It does certainly make the election win look bigger, which is nice to get in hindsight, a little retroactive win increase.
Yeah.
What is it that's behind this division? As you say,
So
they've been together for a long time. What's caused the split?
So there's a few things, but basically the 2 parties, the Liberals and the Nationals, after each election, I think they effectively come together to decide on what's going to be in their joint sort of platform. And the Nationals, which are the smaller party, were demanding that a few things, including I think like a nuclear policy, something on like a sort of regional fund, things like that. They were really pushing to keep it in that platform. And also they wanted a certain distribution of shadow cabinet seats as well that the Liberals didn't agree to. So the Nationals chose to step away from that. So that's sort of the justification they gave. But I guess there's probably a sort of more overall reason, which is that after quite a major defeat that the coalition suffered, they probably want to go on their own bit of a soul-searching thing rather than tying themselves to the Liberals who sort of, I guess, let them down at the election.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you think they'll get back together?
I mean, history suggests
Surely.
they will,
Showbiz
but
speculation
it's
here.
gossip.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe, but maybe not for some time. I guess they don't really need to until the next election.
But the next election's quite soon.
That's
It's
true.
Crazy. That's what I was
It's
just
every
thinking.
3 years.
3 years is
Yeah,
not,
because they can't form, neither the Liberals or the Nationals, I think, can form a government without coming together. So they'll have to work that out before
They kind of have to
the
come
election in
together.
3 years' time. Yeah.
Or at least they have to come together post-election. I guess they could campaign separately. And as you say, there's maybe some benefit to the Nationals of distancing themselves from the Liberals, especially given recent performance. For the moment, though, Anthony Albanese moving up on the board, moving into the just straight positive section. So good news for him.
Yeah.
Good year so far, I'd say, for Albanese. And he'll be very pleased to see that move, I'm sure.
on his way to being like supreme leader of Australia. You know what I mean?
Okay, let's move on. Nadja, who is your winner this week?
My winner of the week is the president of the right-wing National Rally Party in France, Jordan Bardella. Essentially, the main reason being is that he's kind of replaced Marine Le Pen, who was the leader of the party for a long time and still is technically, but she's a parliamentary speaker, but she's been rifled with a lot of legal problems, and even though she got a really great result in last year's French snap parliamentary elections, she's just, these legal troubles have completely taken away any confidence in her being the future leader of the party. And last month it was confirmed that if she's barred from running for presidency in the next election, which is in 2027, then Bardella will be definitely replacing her. That's already been sorted out. But what's the most positive thing that's happened for him in recent weeks is there's been a handful of pollings that have been conducted within the party itself and within the wider French electorate that widely pushes Bardella as the presidential candidate instead of Le Pen. So I can read a few polling results. One of the polls from IFOP said, one of the polls from IFOP said, which asked a handful of French people who's in a better position to run, Bardella or Le Pen, and 53% said Le Pen and 69% said Bardella. And there's one more poll I'll mention, is that for the first time, polling within the party put Bardella and Le Pen at equal running at 31% as the presidential voting candidate. So he's basically kind of replaced Le Pen completely, even though she's not technically out of the picture yet. And this is, it's good news for him. He's so far tried to kind of quell any kind of dissent in the party that there is a rift going on between them two, because Le Pen, she's been holding the reins on this party for a long time. Her father was the founder of this party. She put Bardella specifically in that position to kind of rein in any kind of discontent or any kind of challenge to her ruling. So I think in the next few weeks, the next few months, we are going to see some kind of power play going on between them to see who will eventually take control of the party. But it's looking good for Bardella right now, so he's moving up.
Does sound very good for him. Very bad for Le Pen too, as you say. She's been working on this for decades, and then all of a sudden it's falling apart, and Bardella's stepped into the wake, moving up into this just regularly positive section. So Bardella has obviously very quickly been able to fill in this gap and become popular and kind of replace Le Pen. What kind of insight do we have behind how he's been able to achieve that? Like, what has he been doing? He's obviously built profile over a number of years, but is there anything particular he's done in recent weeks to do that? Or is it just Le Pen's out of the picture and therefore...
Well, in recent weeks, there's not much I can say for that, aside from probably the main reason is being that Le Pen is just, the legal troubles have been just too much for her. But I can say in the past few months, and what we saw in the elections, in the European elections last year and the parliamentary snap elections last year, is that Bardella has been really successful in building this kind of online TikTok platform or whatever you want, a social media platform, whatever you want to call it, kind of garnering the young voter support that's needed. He was really successful in it. He was one of the probably leading populist firebrands across Europe that kind of pushed this kind of TikTok platform as a way to gain support from young voters. And we're seeing a lot of other presidential candidates or political leaders in loads of different countries in Europe who've tried really similar tactics and have kind of followed in his steps. So I think that's one of the main reasons that maybe people within the circle of the National Rally are now ready to push him to the front completely, just because of this kind of young people support he's gained. But maybe someone else has better ideas.
I think that's very true. Do we know what sort of content he does?
No.
Yeah, but it's like straight to camera, you know what I mean?
I don't know.
True. Vertical. Yeah,
exactly.
That's all we know. Yeah.
Okay, Zach, let's move on to you. Who is your winner this week?
My winner of the week is European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. The main reason is that a couple of days ago, Trump suddenly announced via Truth Social that he was very unhappy with the way that the ongoing trade deal negotiations between, maybe just trade negotiations, I don't know if you can call it a deal, but anyway, those negotiations between the US and the EU, he was unhappy with how they were going. And he said, I've had enough of this. We're slapping 50% tariffs, which is higher than the 20% originally threatened, right, on Liberation Day, on all EU imports coming in to the US starting from June 1st. Von der Leyen has successfully convinced him to at least delay that to, I think, July 9th, maybe the 7th, while the sort of negotiations restart. But I think just more fundamentally, the prospect of a trade war with the US and the sort of issues around global trade and the EU's trade balance with various other countries and blocs essentially gives von der Leyen and the Commission more power, right? They are trade is obviously like an EU remit. It wasn't that big a deal until really Trump came to the stage. And now the sort of Commission's ability and its responsibility to negotiate trade deals and agreements with players like the US and China has essentially just given it more power in the European context. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. So von der Leyen making it at the top of the board. And as you say, the one thing that she's been remarkably good at during her time kind of heading up the EU Commission is just kind of bringing together more and more power and putting herself more in the center of things. And this is another example of that, right? Like this is an ongoing trend that under von der Leyen, she has like built a role for herself that maybe didn't exist in the same way before.
Queen of Europe.
Yeah.
That's what they call it, apparently. Yeah, I think so. Although I do think most of it is a consequence of circumstance rather than anything von der Leyen's done, right? Like the Commission has adopted a lot more power in part in response to the war in Ukraine, right? Obviously nothing to do with her.
Yeah.
And then also in reaction now to Trump.
Yeah.
So I think that the Commission was always going to sort of accumulate more power. In some sense, I think that even without those particular events, I think that Europe was tending in that direction anyway. But yeah, obviously it's very much to her benefit.
Yeah. Backs her up at the top of the board.
Yeah, it does.
Trump not moving this week. So let's talk about the other side of it. What was the discussion there that we think that forced his hand and forced him to back down? Is it a case of just like these tariffs are like yet another example of Trump throwing a big number around, then the other side saying, well, we'll sit down and talk about it, and then it's stopping? Or is there more fundamental going on between the US and EU here?
What I think's probably happened is that, and you've got to read it between the lines here, right? Because obviously this is all behind closed doors. No one knows exactly what happened. But there was, before the Trump's sort of furious Truth Social, there was a lot of sort of frustrated chat from American officials, basically about non-tariff barriers, right? So American officials were saying that, the Europeans have all these regulations that make it very hard for American companies. A good example is like licensing agreements, right? Or like, Trump's favorite example, this isn't true, but like his favorite example was that Japan used to drop a boulder on a car, and if it broke, it wasn't allowed to be sold in Japan. And the EU has quite stringent. It's not true, by the way. It's just
Great story.
He always tells that story, and it's just not true. But the EU has high, basically safety standards for vehicles, right? So Cybertrucks, for instance, I think aren't actually road legal in lots of European countries, or maybe the entire EU. Anyway, those sort of non-tariff barriers, there were things that the American officials were having to go at. Another good example, by the way, just coming to mind, is like hormone-injected beef, right? That's a classic example here in the UK. And the American officials see these essentially barriers to trade, essentially like distortions to what would otherwise be a free market.
Yeah.
Whereas the Europeans just see these as a matter of like sovereignty, right? Like as a sovereign bloc or country, Europe or European countries have the right to regulate their food standards, regulate their vehicle standards, those sort of things. And that sort of bleeds into this argument about big tech as well, right? Like Americans, or at least the Trump administration, sees like the taxes and the fines and the regulations imposed on American big tech companies operating in Europe as some sort of regulatory distortion. Whereas the Europeans say that, no, these are just, this is just us exercising our regulatory sovereignty, right? And that these regulations that we're imposing are not biased towards European companies. They apply equally. It's not like European car companies can sell unsafe cars while American ones can't. And what I think has happened is that the Europeans have probably said, okay, fine, we'll at least talk about some of these sorts of things, because that was a real sort of stonewall issue beforehand. There were lots of reports. The American officials just weren't getting anywhere, and the Europeans were just saying, look, non-tariff barriers, I don't really know what you want us to do. Like, we're not going to give up our regulatory sovereignty to the US here. So I think that's probably what would have happened.
Great.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, maybe the one other thing is we might be seeing a rerun of around 2018, which is when there was, again, Trump was threatening tariffs on the EU. And then him and Jean-Claude Juncker, who was the commission president back at the time, had this like 4-hour meeting. And it was long meeting. Everyone was like, oh, what's going to happen here? And they came out of it, and Trump was like, okay, I'm not going to do any tariffs. And Jean-Claude Juncker was like, we're going to buy American soybeans and liquefied natural gas. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago.
We did.
The soybeans.
Yeah, exactly. It's the headline catching purchase agreements, right? Where Europe just basically says we're going to do exactly what we're going to do anyway. Yeah. And just lists a bunch of American products that we'd probably buy in the first place. And Trump goes, that sounds pretty good. So I think there's probably something to do with that as well.
Great. Can't wait for all the soybeans.
Yeah, my intuition, by the way, is that I don't think anything that dramatic will come of this. I mean, I know this is a massive U-turn from what I was talking about a couple of weeks ago when I was saying that Trump was going to destroy the global economy, but I do think that the basing this off the China deal, if you can even call it that, sort of mutual winding down of tariffs, and the UK deal, which basically again involved a whole lot of purchase agreements in exchange for the winding down of tariffs, suggests that Trump's sort of trade anxieties can be quite easily placated by some pretty insubstantial offers.
So, real shame for content, though, isn't it?
It
Collapse
isn't it?
of the global
Isn't.
economic order would have
Yeah,
been great.
that's true.
But, you know,
CPI might have gone down though.
what's the risk? Okay, before we move on and discuss the audience suggestion from last week, a quick shout out to our poster, all of the world's
It's behind you.
every major global alliance explained. It's behind me, as Rory pointed out, and it's also on screen now. And it's a poster that Rory and I made that runs you through all of the world's major alliances, shows you how different countries overlap, who works together, who doesn't, how different continents are shaped and their alliances. And hopefully the kind of messy, confusing nature of it is also something that you think looks kind of cool and might look nice on your wall as like a weird, colourful flowchart. So if you want to dive deeper into that, if you want to learn more about that, there'll be a link in the description that will allow you to buy a copy. And we'll also add a link in the description to the video we made, which explains the poster and runs through all the alliances. So if you just want to learn more, that's free. You can watch the video. And if you want to pick it up and put it on your wall, then you can head to the store and buy one now. If you use code WorldLeader at checkout too, that's all one word, you also get an additional 20% off your purchase. And I believe all of the posters are already 20% off on the store. So that's like 40.
Wow.
It's crazy.
It's a great deal.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. So head to the store, code WorldLeader, and pick up a poster. Thank you for your support. Okay, so every week we let the audience choose one person who we either add to the board or move on the board. And within reason, we then discuss where they ought to be and we shuffle them around. Last week, the top comment on last week's podcast was Nicolae, the Romanian president, as of moments ago. So therefore, we ought to discuss. He's a new addition. He will either be added to the lightly positive or the lightly negative section. Let's discuss where he's going to go. I'm going to start with you, Nedja.
I mean, yeah, he's moving up.
Yeah.
Obviously, winning the presidency, great thing to happen. It's
pretty good.
That's a good week. I mean, that'd be a great week for me, winning the presidency. So definitely moving up for that. But it's more than just that he won the presidency. It's the fact that he basically kind of came out of nowhere. For those of you who haven't been following the entire Romanian saga that's been going on for the past few months, they basically held the presidential elections back in December. The results were later annulled, and they had a rerun more recently with the second round happening last week. And he was sworn into the presidency yesterday. He wasn't actually participating in the first round of the elections back in December. He only signed up. Well, he was only put on the ballot in the second run as a liberal independent candidate. He's currently the mayor. Well, he was currently the mayor of Bucharest, the capital of Romania, and he basically he essentially came out of nowhere. For most of the polling for the second round saw the leader of the nationalist far right party, George Simeon. He was predicted to win, and he won the first round, and he won by quite a margin compared to Nicolae. Second round, Nicolae won against him with like an extra 10%, 10 percentage points, which is quite a wide margin.
Yeah,
it wasn't expected at all. So that's a great win for him. It's not over. I think the battle has just begun for him. He might have succeeded in keeping like the far right out of the presidency for now, but he's got now an entire government coalition to make out of some very complicated and tense politics that's happening in Romania right now. And he also kind of ran on this anti-corruption platform as well. And that's not going to be easy to deliver to deliver promises on that either. So he does have a long road ahead of him. But yeah, for the point of just winning the entire election, he gets to move up.
Pretty good. Zach, I'm assuming you agree, winner?
Yeah, I completely agree. And just to reiterate what Niall just said, like in the first round, it did look like Simeon was going to win.
Yeah.
He got like 40% of the first round votes. And then to only increase that by whatever it was,
Yeah.
5 to 10 points, and then lose is obviously a pretty weak result from him.
What do we think caused that? What was the difference between the first and second round? Obviously, redistribution of kind of third, fourth, fifth place votes clearly went his way. But is there anything particular happened between those elections?
Do you want to go?
I can
Yeah.
answer
Go.
One of the main reasons is, like you said, obviously in the second round, there's fewer candidates, and most of the kind of liberal centre party candidates all did flock to Nico Jordan. But there was one really big story that we covered on TLDR, and I think I've talked about quite a few times on the podcast anyway, so I'll just repeat myself again. But there's 1 million Hungarians living in Romania, and most of their votes didn't go into Nico Jordan in the first round. It went to another candidate who obviously got kicked out following the first round. But because George Simeon has, for the past few years since he's been in the kind of political fairground of whatever, he's been bashing the Hungarian Romanians a bit and been spewing a bit of inter-ethnic conflict between Romanians and the Hungarians living in Romania, that essentially a lot of analysts have written that Nico Jordan won because of the Hungarian vote, because 1 million Hungarians all of a sudden flocked to Nico Jordan because they couldn't see George Simeon as a president that could protect their minority rights and all that comes along with it. So I think that's part of the story, maybe not the entire fully explanation, but that's definitely an aspect of it.
Interesting.
Yeah, I completely agree. And also think that probably hurt him amongst the wider electorate, right? Yeah. So he looks like a hypocrite.
Yeah.
Because he spent however long dissing Hungarians, and then turns around and says, "Can you guys vote for me?" Just, I think something slightly similar. The polling is sort of open to interpretation at the point, but something slightly similar is happening in Poland, right? So there's the Polish presidential first round, and the right-wing candidate basically came top on a plurality of first round votes, and the sort of like more centrist candidate who's aligned to Tusk came second. And originally everyone was like, okay, fine, looks like the right-wing candidate's going to win here. I can't remember his name.
Trzaskowski?
Is he
Narowski?
Trzaskowski and Narowski, but I'm not sure which one is which. But the more right-wing candidate has seen a bit of a slump in the polls, in part because it looks like he's started sort of basically sort of sucking up to the third place candidate, who's the very far right candidate from the Confederation Party.
Sorry, the top three candidates are the far right candidate, the right candidate, and the very far right candidate.
Gotta love Polish politics.
At some point, they start becoming centrist.
He might not, the Confederation guy might not come third, but he came somewhat lower down. And that sort of like pivot has made him look like a bit of a hypocrite.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that there's always that risk, right, in the second round, and that there's always that horse trading. You're trying to maneuver and attract votes from candidates you were previously competing with, and therefore insulting.
Interesting. Well, we'll see how that plays out too. Rory,
you're
last up.
I agree.
Winner?
Okay, absolutely nothing to add, but I agree. He's a winner.
Okay, great. Well, Nico Jordan is moving up on the board, being added to the lightly positive section, a very crowded section. Although, to be fair, people also moving out of that section this week too, so who knows? But yes, that is a upward movement. Let us know in the comments who you want to see added or moved on the board next week, and the top comment within reason on this episode will be added or moved next week with the panel. Okay, great. Let's move on to our losers of the week. Rory, let's come straight back to you. Who is your loser this week?
My loser of the week is Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And I am aware that he's had some severe downward movement in the last few weeks. But I do think the events of the most recent week do justify another move down for him. Basically, the overall theme is that in the last week, and sort of earlier than that as well, people and leaders of countries that aren't natural critics of Israel or the Israeli government have been becoming increasingly critical of Netanyahu and the actions of the Israeli government and military in Gaza. And it really does feel like there has been a bit of a turning point. This sort of comes as Israel tries to implement its new aid system that basically everyone who's actually involved in the sector has condemned as completely insufficient. The about 3-month-long blockade has sort of been lifted, but they're still not letting in nearly enough aid for the 2 million or so people in Gaza. And, the ceasefire has, collapsed a while ago, but we've got dozens, if not hundreds of Palestinians being killed every day now. I think the two biggest examples of these quite heavy criticisms of Netanyahu come, one from inside Israel and two from Germany. So German Chancellor Friedrich Merz had, Germany has been probably the biggest or least most reluctant to condemn Israel since October 7th, I guess. But Merz said this week, he said, harming the civilian population in such a way can no longer be justified by a fight against terrorism, which is a real shift in position from a German chancellor. And, at the same time, you've got countries that have been more critical of Israel within Europe, also pushing for more action. But having Merz change that tone like that is really significant. Within Israel, you've got former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert. I've never actually said his name out loud, so I don't know if I'm saying that right. He is a former prime minister, former member of the Likud party, which is Netanyahu's party. And I'm just going to read his quote. He wrote an article that was really quite heavily damning. And he said, what we are doing in Gaza now is a war of devastation, indiscriminate, limitless, cruel and criminal killing of civilians. It's the result of government policy, knowingly, evilly, maliciously, irresponsibly dictated. Yes, Israel is committing war crimes.
Wow.
And that's not a peace activist saying that. That's a former prime minister of Israel who himself oversaw the 2006 war in Lebanon and launched Operation Cast Lead, which was another war in Gaza in about 2008, 2009. So he is someone who is not a natural critic of Israeli government policy. And for that to come out, I think is really significant and really symbolic of what feels like quite a significant turning point in both domestic and international positions on Israel.
Yeah, as you say, this is something we've been talking about. This has been the main reason behind Netanyahu's drop on the board lately. I mean, as you can see, he's now at the bottom of the board, having hit the bottom 4 times. So really ought to be absolutely miles down off the bottom of the board if there were more rungs to fall. But that has primarily been because of this kind of turning from the West, from various kind of supporters. At what point do we think, if at all, this actually leads to concrete action? That we have seen condemnation from all kinds of European countries, from his own kind of partyman now. But thus far, like, they're kind of independent enough. They're not like Ukraine in that they're massively reliant on money and weapons and all those things. Like, there is stuff the international community could do were they wanting to, but we've not quite reached that stage yet. So does this ever reach concrete action, or does this condemnation just create kind of maybe the starting point for further action in the future?
I mean, that is the big question. I'm not, unless really big action does happen, I'm not convinced that words alone will change the Israeli government's policy. But then you look at the UK, for example, Keir Starmer has become more critical of Israel. Yeah. And they suspended talks over a sort of trade agreement, and he said they'll consider further concrete action. But actually, that's not that. What they've done so far isn't that concrete. It's nowhere near enough to make the Israeli government change its mind. So if governments continue along that line of sort of hesitating on real concrete action, I don't think much is going to change.
Do you guys agree with that as well?
I think the real concrete action would have to be halting arms supplies. I think that's just the most obvious thing at this point. Suspending trade talks. I mean, I think to send a real signal and a real message that we don't support this war, it would be just to end arming that said country. So, and it doesn't look like that's on the table just yet. So
yeah,
but even then, I still don't think you'd change Israeli government policy if just like the UK or even Europe as a whole ended arms sales. I think one of the reasons I don't think it would change government policies, I think what you see is this sort of doom loop where international criticism of the Israeli government only sort of forces Netanyahu to sort of like double down, in part because he needs to sort of basically continue convincing the Israeli electorate, or at least parts of it, that he's their only chance of like security. He's still Mr. Security and all that sort of shenanigans. But also because it just sort of like breeds a defensiveness, right? sort of like collective political defensiveness. So I don't think that would be enough. I just do think at the end of the day, it all just depends on the US. I just think the US is the only country with sufficient leverage to actually change policy. And you know, the only formal mechanism by which that could happen, right, apart from the US sort of intervening, is the UN. And again, you need the US, right? You need at least the US to abstain on a Security Council resolution. And then also, even if the UN did, but that gets into really worrying territory, right? Sorry. If you do get some sort of meaningful load-bearing UN Security Council resolution against Israel, you know, what can the world do? Israel is a nuclear state. You know,
And from the US's perspective, are we seeing any movement there from Trump or anyone in his administration?
Yes and no. I think there were rumors a couple of days ago that Hamas and the US had agreed a 70-day ceasefire without Israeli input, that this was then going to be sold to the Israelis. There was conflicting reports on this, but again, reading between the lines, what seems to happen is the US went to Israel with this, and the Israelis immediately said, no, there's no what's going to happen. There were Israeli officials quoted as saying this will be a victory for Hamas. And I think what was interesting there was the American reaction, right? In that it does look like America did agree to this ceasefire, but actually Witkoff then came out and said Hamas have scuppered it. And maybe there's some truth to that, but I think that what you're seeing at the moment is that in private, Trump and Witkoff are very willing are clearly criticizing Israel. And we hear constant reports, you know, of them making some quite furious statements, but in public so far, not much has actually changed, right? Again, it's all done indirectly, you know, like it'll be Trump buddying up to the Gulf monarchies, for instance, or doing a deal with Iran. This is all implicit criticism as well, or distancing from Netanyahu, right? But there has been nothing substantive. I do think there is a good chance that will change. I just think that Trump knows that at the moment his foreign policy looks pretty crap, right? He was going to get peace in Ukraine. How's that going? And now he's, you know, promising to end the war in Gaza. How's that going? But I think that for now you haven't seen anything too substantial.
Interesting. He's got space to fall then. There's apparently more room on the bottom of this board. Netanyahu hitting the bottom there yet again. Not someone hitting the bottom here, but someone moving down, a new addition.
Love that.
Nadia, who do we have?
Yes. Adding to the board, we have the Indonesian president, Prabowo Subianto. Might give him a little introduction since he's new to the board. But essentially, he came into office around 6 months ago, and he succeeded Joko Widodo, also known as Jokowi, who ruled Indonesia for a few decades, maybe actually not a few decades, but I think for 3 terms. And during his terms, he essentially transformed Indonesia into, I don't want to say a developing country, but into, the GDP kind of, you know, shot into the air, and Indonesia became this investment, you know, this beautiful place to invest in, and loads of money was being pumped into Indonesia. The economy was growing, and his predecessor, Jokowi, he was responsible for that. And now Subianto won the election with quite a landslide majority, actually, last February. And now he's leading the country. But the reason why he's going down is that essentially he kind of won the elections on this kind of populist platform, and he promised to enact these specific economic policies, which, you know, a typical populist leader, you know, it's just going to be overspending, you know, welfare programs, I don't know, pension pay hikes, whatever. And he's put in a lot of these type of policies. So he's rolled in this new lunch program, which gives you preschool meals for like millions and millions of children. He's created a sovereign wealth fund. He's given teachers pay rises, and loads of more little economic policies are already pushing the country's budget deficit. And this has become a bit of a problem because the numbers aren't looking great right now for the economy. And it's quite a big U-turn for a country that for the past decade or so, more than a decade, has been just seeing substantial growth. The rupiah hit a 27-year low. Growth is the weakest it's been since 2021. Consumer confidence is down, and the Indonesian stocks have fallen. And there's now talks that he may have to put into place certain austerity measures to fund all of these programs. So he's moving down for that reason. And that's that.
Fair enough. Added to the board in the likely negative section. How is this how is this being received in Indonesia? Presumably poorly, but obviously, as you say, a lot of these moves are policy moves in order to get popular approval and kind of very kind of popular policies. You would have thought, at least in the abstract, but when you're trying to feed that many children, it gets expensive.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that
There's a lot of people there.
You're sounding quite
so
right
many
there.
There's too many children.
How many? It's
Yeah.
like 120 million people in Indonesia. Or
It's
something
the
crazy.
third
Way more
biggest
than that.
democracy.
300 million.
It's like 400 million.
400
yeah.
million.
Yeah.
It's crazy to think. I mean, that actually is a crazy. I do underestimate Indonesia.
I just did.
We did a video not long ago saying it might be the world's next superpower, but absolutely enormous country. And Naja's right that, and if those growth rates had continued, right, Indonesia would be an enormous economy as well.
120 million is Japan. Don't know why I got them mixed up. Indonesia's 281.
281.
That's a lot
So
of
it's
people.
Yeah.
not 400.
Not 400, no.
You were both somewhere in the
Maybe
middle between.
average
yeah,
There
you
could be
average
around
out.
120 million children because I bet the average age in Indonesia is lower than
That's a
average.
good segue into your question, which is
Wow.
the fact, which is the fact that he became really popular among young voters, and a lot of Indonesia's electorate
Yeah.
are young people.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'll add one more thing,
Go on.
which is that, you know, he promised that one of the free school meals thing, for instance, that was in his manifesto, and he did when the election campaign was happening, he did kind of create. So this guy, he was actually like in the 80s, the right hand man basically of the authoritarian dictator of Indonesia, and he oversaw some like pretty bad war crimes, even though that's not been. He hasn't confessed to that
Sure.
at all. But during his election campaign, he kind of reimagined himself as a kind of cuddly grandpa kind of vibe, and he got a lot of young people on board.
Aw.
Yeah, yeah.
Sweet war crimes.
Sweet walkers. And it managed to work. Like, he won by a landslide majority. One of his manifesto promises was to put in these free school meals, and he's done that. So there's definitely, and when he came into office, there was his popularity and his polling was still doing pretty well, despite the fact that he actually introduced some pretty controversial measures earlier on, which were kind of combating media freedoms in the country as well. So there's a lot going on, but I guess we'll have to see, in terms of popularity-wise, how all these programs will have an effect on if they'll hit the economy or not. I guess we'll have to see. I don't know. Yeah.
So-
No, the only thing I was going to say, and this is a bit quite on brand, but it's lots of these like slightly poorer emerging market economies have been hit by the wider increase in borrowing costs, especially for long-term debt. And it's one of those things that is partly to do with Trump, right? But when American borrowing costs go up, so do everyone else's.
Yeah.
It's just the way the bond market works, and Indonesia will be no exception there, right? And it's just always tough, you know. There's not really anything that they've done. I mean, sure, there's been some pretty loose fiscal policy, but there's just that structural pull on all of those emerging market economies, which is just very tough at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, being added to the board in the bottom half, but he's got a lovely hat on and so many free school meals. So, you know,
Granddad's great.
Grandad's doing well. Come on. Indonesian food's delicious. Okay, Zach, let's close with you. Your loser of the week. Who is it?
My loser of the week is Tory party leader Kemi Badenoch. It feels a bit ridiculous having her as a world leader at the moment.
She's a Bardella.
This is true, but her party, he is quite
True.
probably the next president of France.
You saying Kemi's not going to be the next prime minister?
I don't think she's going to be the next leader of the Tory party. She's not going to, there's no way she's going to last. She's she's currently fourth in the polls, the Tory party. And every time she speaks, things seem to get worse. She just comes out with the craziest stuff. And she seems absolutely set on fighting the next election on basically immigration and cultural war issues.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that the Tory numbers on both those issues per se are completely in the dumps. And they're things that Nigel Farage clearly has the upper hand on.
Yeah.
And the polling has just plummeted, and she is now at about 16% of the polls. That is behind the Lib Dems, that's behind Labour, that is behind Reform. And I think it's hard to see her lasting even the next couple of months. So Robert Jenrick is her presumptive successor. I'll put money on her going pretty soon.
We get through Conservative leaders so quickly.
And people always
It's
say,
a joke.
I know.
And they're going to run out. They haven't got that many MPs.
You joke
They keep
around.
rattling through them. Like, who have they got?
You honestly, it's not. I think that's a very, very real issue for the
Yeah.
Tory party. The Tory party have always had this sort of reserve of big beast backbenchers, and there's just none left. I mean, that process starts with Johnson, right, who culls a whole load of big names.
But I was going to say that, you can tell things are bad when, like now there are these rumours of Boris Johnson considering a return, and it's, that's something that comes up every now and then. But I think you probably track those news stories with how bad the current leader's doing.
If Jenrick does come back in, that'll be the second time that in whoever they chose in the final round of the previous one just end up getting the other one.
Yeah.
Like it happened with Truss and Sunak, it's now happening with Kemi and
Turns out the membership are idiots. I mean, why would you?
They're running so low on people. It's like, we didn't want them, but
yeah.
what else are we going to do?
No, it's an appallingly thin parliamentary party.
It is as you say, Johnson was looking like a pretty good option at this stage. Like,
People say
it looks like a bit of a mistake in hindsight. They should have kept him. He was just having parties.
I don't want to turn this into a Starmageddon episode, but I think that this is interesting. I think that actually, if Johnson came back too soon, it'd be a disaster because I think Farage would have a field day with Johnson, right?
True.
In that Farage had a field day saying that your Brexit deal was rubbish, and that you let immigration skyrocket, which is clearly the thing driving Reform's vote share at the moment. I think if Johnson was to come back, it'd have to be a last minute substitution, right?
Yeah.
Just pull him in the last before Farage can actually make those arguments, right? So Jenrick can spend 3 years saying that we don't like immigrants either, and then Johnson can come in at the last minute and do a whole load of I love this country, and everyone goes, yay, Southern Uplands.
So you said obviously that Kemi is attempting to fight on the basis of immigration, cultural issues like that don't work for the Tories. Are there any issues that you do think work for the Tories?
Yes,
what should they be doing?
There is an issue actually, by the way, and it's the economy. It's that strange. I mean, even though they've obviously had a sort of up and what's the right word? It's not a perfect record. Recently, there's obviously Truss, and that wasn't great, and then to a lesser extent, I guess Johnson. But actually, if you poll people, and there's some really good polling, I think, by More in Common on this, they still do trust the Tories on the economy more than the other parties, which I think is sort of unsurprising. I mean, think about their main competitor for the economy is still Labour.
Yeah.
And no one really trusts Farage on the economy. If you actually ask him about it, it's not really the reason people are voting for him. And actually, Labour are their only main competitors there. And Labour did a good job of eating away at the Tories' deal on the economy during the election campaign. But it turns out that Labour aren't great at so far at least. Yeah. And, open question as to how much you should blame Reeves and Starmer for it. But so far, they don't look very good at handling the economy. And strategically, the obvious thing to do for the Tories would be to double down on the economy. Go, look, I know we made a mistake with Liz Truss, but we are the sort of old school guardians of fiscal conservatism. If you want things to go back to normal, go back to feeling safe, you should vote for us. But she's not doing that. She's, I don't know. I just saw she described, I mean, this just goes to show you how sort of gaff prone she is, but she described Israel-Gaza conflict as a proxy war between sort of democracy and barbarism.
Barbarism, or like civilization.
Civilization and barbarism.
Like
that. Parroting a Netanyahu line that I think we can all agree is pretty nasty, framing it as sort of civilization versus barbarism is barely a euphemism.
Yeah.
But also describing the Israel-Gaza war as a proxy war.
Yeah.
What sort of tinfoil hat nonsense is that? For starters, don't flatter us. Israel's not our proxy.
Yeah.
If anything, we're theirs. It's a stupid mental sort of online thing to say. It's just sorry, that was a bit strong language. It's a silly thing to say.
It's getting clipped to the short.
It is just a silly thing to say, and it's the sort of rhetoric that comes from someone who's cosplaying a politician as opposed to a real one.
Wow.
Well, it does come off it.
I mean, proxy politician.
It's the sort of like pseudo grandiose nonsense that people who like think they're. Now I'm just sorry, Kemi. I don't know you. I'm presuming you're a nice person, but the sort of like from people who just think they're way smarter than they actually are. Right? It's a proxy was the sort of thing that like geopolitical analysts, I mean, a bit like us, sort of throw around willy nilly without really knowing what they're talking about. And then when it turns out though, when you're the leader of this, the biggest party in British political history, and you start saying that, you are just sort of feeding the conspiracy theorists with content. I mean, it's crazy. It's also just not true. It doesn't. Okay, whatever.
Crazy.
Yeah. So, but I think the main point I'm trying to make, right, is it goes to show how just bad she is at media, right? She's not a good performer.
well, as you can learn about on Starmageddon most weeks, I'm sure.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, that is everyone. That's everyone who's moving on the board this week. But as always, we're going to close with our ultimate winners of the week and ultimate losers of the week, where we could get some extra movement. Okay, so we're going to close with our ultimate winners and losers of the week. The way this works is we'll start with our winners and we'll list everyone who was nominated as a winner this week. The team then get to decide who their ultimate winner is. We'll write it down, and if we have consensus, that person moves again on the board. They move up an additional position. We then do the same thing again for loser, and then we're done. So your options for the ultimate winner of the week are Anthony Albanese, Jordan Bardella, Ursula von der Leyen, and Nico Jourdain. Rory, who's your ultimate winner of the week?
I've gone for Nikosha Dan. Dan the man.
Dan the man.
Dan the man.
Wow, we're speedrunning it for Dan the man. Anyone want to give justification for that? I think we clearly all agree. So if someone wants to...
I mean, winning an election, obviously very good, but the coming out of nowhere kind of thing and beating expectations, you got to give it to him.
You know, he's a maths prodigy as well.
Really?
He has 2
good
perfect
at
scores in the IMO, which would be International Maths Olympiad. I mean, that's like that's crazy
That's
numbers.
smart.
Yeah.
He's a smart guy.
So he is smart.
Okay, so Nico Jourdain moves up an additional spot from the lightly positive section to the fully positive section. A huge start for him. I can only imagine that as leader of Romania, he's going to be moving on the board all the time going forward. But who knows?
I think he might move more than you think.
We'll wait and see.
Can I say one thing? I had a thought.
You've had a thought?
Yeah, I had a thought. It's crazy. I'm just thinking because Ursula von der Leyen's looking at me from that board. I think actually that's another reason that she's had a great time, right? In that the sort of anti-European troublemaker, the anti-Brussels troublemaker, didn't win in Romania, and there is a nearby universe in which Orban loses the next election, right?
Yeah.
And Dan's in place, and Tusk hangs on, and his candidate wins the presidential election. All of a sudden, we have no more troublemakers left. I mean,
just friendly Europe.
I mean, there's a general sense of Brussels skepticism at the moment, but yeah, there would be none
of the big fighters.
no veto wielding troublemakers.
Yeah,
What about
exactly.
Robert Fitzo? Yeah, he's still there poking it.
Yeah, that's a good point. He is, but he's not actually. He's not a big enough name. I think he could be squashed.
Okay, so our ultimate loser of the week, your options are Benjamin Netanyahu, Prabowo Subianto, and Kemi Badenoch. Okay, Rory, who is your ultimate loser this week?
Gone for Kemi.
We don't know. We're just going for it. Rory.
Do you know what made me laugh? I looked over to Scarlett's face, and there's the look of like disdain on her face as we go like, "Hey!"
Rory, why did we all go for Kemi? Do you think?
I think it's just that she seems to out of place on that board.
Yeah,
That she's got to be down low.
she's at
Falling
the
to
bottom
fourth
now.
behind the Lib Dems, and yes,
It's
bad
pretty
place to
bad,
be.
pretty bad. Dead at the bottom of the board, and I would also propose, not sure if everyone agrees, we place an axe over her head. If and when she gets kicked out as Tory
I love an
leader,
axe, yeah.
gone without question. Kemi, at the bottom of the board and axed. Though, as we say, the axe might be hanging for a very long time, but we'll find out. Let us know in the comments what you think of our decisions. Were they your ultimate winners and losers this week? And also let us know who you'd like to see added to the board next week or moved on the board next week. Whoever you choose, within reason, will be added or moved. So go wild. Add whoever you want. Ish.
Within reason.
But the within reason allows them to do whatever they want, I guess. Join us again next week for more winners, for more losers, and for more lovely times. We'll see you then.
More lovely times.
Yay.